Hello everyone, welcome to my Garage Rock video series. I'm going to review some of the best and most obscure 60s garage bands. And today I want to start with one of my favorite singers of all time, and that's Neil Diamond. So in 1964, rock started to heat up and there was this new musical form called garage rock. It was a subgenre of the old rock and roll. It was heavier and edgier, more raw sound. And in fact, in 1965, there was an explosion of it, thanks to The Who. And bands like, Beau Brummels and the Standells. I love the Standells. Also, Alice Cooper and Frank Zappa emerged from that lot. And Frank Zappa started recording already in that era with the Mothers of Invention, and then he discovered Alice Cooper in 1969 and signed him up to his label. Perhaps the biggest name was The Who, then the best example of garage before there was anyone like them. But the other bands who sort of copied The Who, the ones who weren't so popular, probably had a more amateur and kind of raw edginess about them, giving them that well-deserved label garage, really earning that label. They each had their own unique sound thanks to analog recording systems that they employed in those days. There was no digital yet. But I believe there is one artist who captured the essence of those garage rock bands more than anyone else. And that is Neil Diamond. He had something reflective of that entire era like no other. That is the era of 1965 to 66. And that is the era that ultimately paved the way for heavy metal and punk rock. The bands like the Kinks and the Who, they were more concerned with making hits. That was their main thing. These bands weren't under such pressure, so they had more freedom to express the concerns of the day. For example, growing up in the 60s, things also like nuclear war, pollution, but also more conventional topics like love lost and love found, and the struggles that every generation experiences with romance. And like in the 60s, there wasn't much remedy. There was no internet, and psychologists and things like that were not really, was still a little bit taboo. They weren't really around that much. And music, the world of music seemed to be the main world to vent those sorts of problems. And so that generation certainly took that up. But I feel like Neil Diamond is the superlative 1960s artist. I mean, he has every style of music that came that decade. He himself adapted it to his songwriting. He sensed an authenticity with his lyrics. He really lives through what he writes rather than just intellectualizing it. I think Solitary Man is probably the best example. You can tell that he really is a solitary man. In every interview he's ever done, he says something like that. He also sings about unusual subject matters like "And the Grass Won't Pay No Mind," something that Elvis covered, and also capturing the happy, good times of the 60s, as in Sweet Caroline. Or Neil Diamond knew well how good they had it in the 60s. Not exactly the band's Psychotic Reaction, who really wanted to be rock and roll royalty, but he certainly did a good job at encapsulating that entire vibration, that entire movement. I feel the prize Neil Diamond should receive is representing that initial garage rock style, and he interprets it in this apocalyptic thrill kind of mood that's in his songs, and that's something that Quentin Tarantino knows very well, and one of the reasons why he's such a fan. Nobody else encapsulates the essence, and not forgetting, he's timeless. I think he's more timeless than The Who. Sorry, The Who, but I think he's just more timeless, you know, represent everything, including things like The Who and all those obscure bands as well, not just the hit makers. His heyday was 1966 to 1972. 72 was the year of this release. Now, I haven't even looked at the gatefold for some years, so I will look at it together now. This is actually my mum's old copy that back in the 80s. That was like pretty much her only record in her record collection. And that was my first exposure to Neil Diamond when I was just 13. And wasn't really a big fan. I wasn't so impressed until a few years later when I got into the 60s and I realised that Neil Diamond was one of those great artists. Album represents his peak, his creative and artistic and recording peak. Hot August Night, it's his masterpiece, for he showed how rock could sound and how energetically it could be played from the very first note. It became the ultimate rock concert of the time, ushering in a whole new 70s market really for compilations. Live albums. No longer were they some kind of compilation or some kind of contractual obligation that artists just reluctantly released. Now, you know, it could be a hot thing. So Peter Frampton followed his footsteps and had like the biggest album of his career. Slade did the same thing with success, and not forgetting, of course, Kiss. One of the greatest albums of Kiss in the 70s was their live album as well, and that set some records. And that leads me to a song that I love very much, which thank God he includes here, called Red, Red Wine. I wonder why he included it. It must have got requested a lot, because that song actually failed to chart, and it was at risk of becoming a very obscure song. It never saw light of day on an album. It was just a rare single that totally failed to go into the top 50 even. And but yet Jamaica seemed to pick it up, and there were hits by Tony Tribe and Eddie Levette, who had hits with it. But particularly Tony Tribe had the biggest hit with Red Red Wine in the reggae style. And it was put on this compilation, which has actually been reissued recently. I love how they reissue these old compilations from Jamaica, because they were like 20 cents when they came out, 10 cents. They were like not for the serious record collector. They were more for general music, casual music fans rather than hardcore fans. And they were just, but they've ended up being a great capsule of their respective eras, these compilations. So I'm so glad they have been reissued, so many of these. Anyway, this happens to be the one with Red Red Wine on it. And in Jamaica, obviously, that was a well-known reggae hit, but the rest of the world was oblivious to it because the whole reggae revolution was still another 3 to 4 years off. This is 1969 and 1970 when, you know, it was a hit twice already in Jamaica. But 1973 was the year when Bob Marley became a worldwide superstar thanks to Chris Blackwell's Island label, who promoted him to that status. So interesting. And it was covered at no less than 20 times before 1983's UB40 version. Then it finally became a #1 hit. What's interesting is he would start to record it in reggae on his subsequent Hot August Night concerts in the 80s, in the 2000s, and his final show in 2012 at the Greek Theatre. And he would toast over the song just like UB40 do on their 12-inch version. And but it was more like a boast about how he's turned this song into a #1 song. It took him 15 years, but he got there. And of course, toasting is the talking over a rhythm that evolved into what we know as rap today. So it's very cute watching and listening to Neil Diamond rap, basically, I suppose. All right, so that's it for Neil Diamond's Hot August Night. I really recommend you get it, and I believe there has been an expanded version in 2012 on its 40th anniversary and has bonus tracks. So that's really good. Some unreleased recordings from that show. All right. Yes, it's also worth mentioning that I'll just quote here, the double platinum 2LP set peaked at #5 on the Billboard 200, while this is in America, but it went to number one in a lot of countries. While fans went absolutely bonkers in Australia. They had a lot of news items in those days and current affairs shows reporting it back then, or not back then, but in the mid 70s when he came back to Australia. This was in 1 in 4 homes in Australia, and I probably believe it. So many garage sales I've seen this back in the 80s. It's just not funny. And so many op shops as well, and second-hand record shops. So in Australia, it spent 29 weeks at number one. There you go. It has re-entered the Australian charts several times over the years on its way to 10 times platinum certification. Reviews were stellar as well. Even the taciturn Lester Bangs praised it in Rolling Stone as a fine representation of the entire spectrum of the diamond oeuvre and great pretentious goofy pop, which he meant as a compliment. So there you go. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for more of my reviews, and stay tuned to more of my reviews on bands, on obscure garage bands of the 1960s. Cheers.